My name is Matthew Vashur from BibleProtector.com, and I'm looking a little bit further at these people who push reader editions of the King James Bible and of their modern versions, rather than the traditional layout of chapters and verses, and each verse its own separate little segment on the page. Now, I want to point to, first of all, a few examples. This is Scrivener's edition as printed in the Cambridge Bible for Schools and Colleges, and you can see that the verses are listed on the right hand side, but in fact the scripture was put into paragraphs and then there's commentary underneath. This is an Oxford picture Bible, and in this one we find again the scripture is put into chunks, like paragraph chunks, and that the verse numbers are put on the outside to the edge, just to help for people to find the place in the passage. And for parts of the scripture that they would deem less important or perhaps more boring, they've put it in this smaller typeface. So it's quite an interesting way they've set this up, but I don't think it's a common way, and I don't think it's that conducive for normal use necessarily, although it is not unusable. I also want to point out this is a lectionary type approach where here in the Book of Common Prayer we find that a passage, for example here in the first Sunday after Easter, where you have a reading given here, in fact 1 John chapter 5, and I point this one out because the word spirit is lowercase even here in this, but you don't have any chapter or verses given in the layout, although you're given the reference where the reading begins from at the beginning there. But it's certainly not broken down by verse, it's just one continuous amount of text. And that really was probably done for more compactness, but also in a lectionary sense or liturgical setting, a person could read it out of this book. However, and that's only for ease, so they're not turning into the Bible into the place, but people who would listen to scripture, read scripture, whether they're in a congregation listening and reading along or whatever, the normal layout of having chapters and verses, as we see here, would be the normal approach. Now, there is this misguided idea from certain people, and they don't express it necessarily, but it probably lays behind some of their reasoning, and it is a hermeneutical issue, and they think that because the scripture was written without verse numbers and without chapter numbers, that somehow we should encounter the scripture in the same way as someone would have done in the first century. And I think that's a bit of a misguided approach, because through the Reformation and beyond, we've been given the scripture by received tradition in a method of layout with chapter numbers and with verse numbers. So that's how we encounter scripture, but it's also for ease of use for new readers. Because let's say for new Christians or young Christians or whatever, if we don't have verse numbers, then saying to find a place is going to be quite challenging and difficult for them. And if you've just got scripture in sort of paragraph chunks, and especially if it doesn't have verse numbers, as some of these people are advocating for in their reader's edition, not even verse numbers, then unless you're familiar with scripture, you're not going to be able to find a reading of a place. Like if they say, well, let's look at 1 John chapter 5 and verse 8, they're not going to be able to find 1 John 5, 8. And the only reason why I would be able to find it is because I know the verse and it starts, and there are 3, and I would know it starts at this place here, but a new Christian wouldn't know that at all. So you tell them 1 John 5, 8, well, they're going to look in a Bible, in a reader's Bible. This is obviously not a reader's edition, this is a liturgical book, but they're not going to be able to easily find the place. And I think that's just a practical challenge to this idea of trying to reject the tradition. And that's probably the biggest problem I see with some of these people. What are they really trying to do? They're trying to cast away that which we have received for something different. This sort of finding and promoting a new thing, something newfangled, something better than what they think was there before. And I don't think it's better or superior in any way. Now, these people will say, oh, we have an embarrassment of riches. Well, Revelation chapter 3 tells us something about this doctrine of this embarrassment of riches. And it tells us that, in fact, these people proclaiming, oh, we're rich, we've got all these things, they don't know that, in fact, they're not rich, they're poor, etc., and that they are counseled of Jesus to, in fact, buy the true riches. And that's in Revelation and chapter 3. Now, that's really important because, people can try and hoodwink people about the superiority of readers' editions and so on. But at the end of the day, we should be sticking with tradition more than that kind of approach. Now, I also want to mention that in Isaiah chapter 28, it talks about here a little, there a little, and it has this idea of basically chunk size information, word upon word, line upon line. That really is what the verse system and having each verse set to the left-hand side, indented to the left, that really helps that kind of approach. It helps the teaching approach, the pedagogical approach, which is line upon line, concept upon concept. So this chapter and verse system is, in fact, the best for ease of encountering and reading and dealing with Scripture, and that really we've got something superior than we've got to go back to the first century and, no verse numbers, no chapter numbers, just chunks of words running together. It's not really conducive for the best experience or the best ability to learn and ability to teach what is written there at all. So I think that in the end, it is much better to encourage the tradition than to lean towards something that sounds like it's sort of Bible libertarianism rather than, as I say, Bible just tradition, trying things that work, the true and tried thing that works, and staying with that. I'll leave that with you today. God bless.